The right-wing Supreme Court has decided to strike down New York's nearly 100-year-old gun law that would essentially make it very difficult for anyone to engage in concealed carry in public spaces. Now, this is a law that's been around actually more than 100 years. And the idea is, hey, let's limit the number of guns in public spaces and keep people safe. But the Supreme Court has ruled that that's a violation of the Second Amendment because, of course, when you have right-wing ideologues taking hold of the Supreme Court, they're going to carry out right-wing ideology. They're going to be right-wing activists, and that is what we are seeing today. So let's get to the details on this. The court, first, let's just talk about the impact of this. It's the widest expansion of gun rights in America over the last decade. So when was the last time we saw this kind of expansion? Well, the court in 2008 recognized for the first time an individual's right to keep guns at home for self-defense in a case from the District of Columbia, and also in 2010 applied that right to the states. Now, the ruling was, of course, divided. Today's ruling was among the conservative justices in the majority and the liberal justices in the minority. The 6-3 ruling with the court's conservative justices in the majority and liberal justices in dissent struck down New York State's limits on carrying concealed handguns outside the home. The court found that the law enacted in 1913 violated a person's right to keep and bear arms under the US Constitution's Second Amendment. Now, Justice Clarence Thomas wrote the majority opinion in this case, and this is what he argued. He argued, quote, "We know of no other constitutional right that an individual may exercise only after demonstrating to government officers some special need. The New York restriction is unconstitutional because it prevents law-abiding citizens with ordinary self-defense needs from exercising their right to keep and bear arms." And what he's referring to there is how the law in New York was written. So there are some exceptions to the law, but the only exception is if you can persuade the state government that you need to engage in concealed carry because there is a very specific threat that you need to defend yourself against. And so that burden, that standard is a very high standard. It's intentionally high because they wanted to limit the number of guns in public spaces. But at this point, what has become increasingly clear to me, Jessica, is it doesn't matter what law you pass to limit guns, what law you pass to protect citizens from things like mass shootings. When you have ideologues serving on the Supreme Court who will carry out exactly what they were put there to carry out, right? Policies that would broaden or widen the rights of the right wing while screwing over everyone else. So they're gonna do it. And that's exactly what they've been doing on a number of different cases.
Yeah, that's exactly what's going on here. As someone who uses guns, this law makes perfect sense. I mean, you need to have a gun if you're under violent threat. The only reason I've ever wanted to learn to use guns, handguns for public safety is because there are crazy people who love to have guns who are extremely violent, and I've come under violent threat. This is more about self-defense than it is about, the Second Amendment. People are much safer if everyday people can't go in the street with guns. The Second Amendment is about the right to bear arms, to have a well-regulated militia. Bro, the militia's not meeting in the Wegmans. Like, you don't need your gun every day in public. And so it's absolutely absurd what Republicans are doing. And if you think about, the due process, right? Someone in law enforcement would have to determine, yes, you're under a certain threat, you're allowed to have a gun to protect yourself in public. The due process they have to go through to determine that is not so different from the kind of due process that was happening under stop and frisk, where law enforcement had to make a determination, is there a crime being committed here? Republicans did not care about that. They did not care that law enforcement could apply that law at their discretion and racially profile people and stop them on the street. But they care about this because it's about their power. It's about their right to have guns. And it's really unfortunate that now they have a majority in the Supreme Court, and this ridiculous hypocritical logic is now becoming law in the United States.
That's right, because if they're striking down this law in New York, that will have a ripple effect, and other states that have similar laws, and there are as many as 6, including California, by the way, will now essentially have will not be able to continue implementing that law. Now, the commissioner for the New York Police Department says, everyone hold your horses, nothing is going to change immediately. In fact, let's go to the last graphic here where she says, if you have a premise permit, it does not automatically convert to a carry permit. If you carry a gun illegally in New York City, you will be arrested. And so I think it's really up to the coming days to figure out how these changes will be made. But one other thing I wanted to note is that while, you have these justices make the argument that no, I mean, these standards are too high. People shouldn't have to meet these special standards in order to carry a gun in public spaces. They did acknowledge something very specific in their decision. The ruling acknowledged that the states can prohibit guns in sensitive places. And that such prohibitions can likely go beyond what is historically considered a sensitive place, such as, oh wow, what a shocker, courthouses and legislative buildings. But why? Why? I'm not allowed, I'm allowed to practice my First Amendment rights in a courthouse, right? Or in a legislative building, right? Why should it be any different when it comes to the Second Amendment, as the Supreme Court sees as, with almost no restrictions? It's amazing because it's like, look, we want to protect Second Amendment rights, even though it's very likely to harm people. But we want to make sure we protect ourselves and insulate ourselves from that harm. That's what I got from that acknowledgement from Supreme Court justices.
Yeah, it feels very much like we are the ruling class. We're gonna, you can have your rights, but you can do it over there. Just keep voting for the people that are giving tax breaks to corporations that we get, dividends from, and we'll be great. That's really the vibe we get from this kind of a sentiment.
And by the way, that's the other part of this, and I'm glad you mentioned corporations, because while this conservative Supreme Court is certainly conservative on social issues, one of the main reasons why the conservative justices were nominated and confirmed is because their number one priority is upholding and protecting the interests of corporations. And in this case, we're talking about gun manufacturers, which of course were represented by the NRA in this case that made it all the way to the Supreme Court. NRA is overjoyed, I'm sure, because they, think that this is just a great expansion of their gun rights, but also because they're delivering for the very people who are paying them to do the lobbying they engage in, the weapons manufacturers. So it's a great day for corporations, a great day for all the individuals who worked really, really hard over the last several decades to install these justices who would implement socially conservative policies, or protect them at least, while simultaneously looking out for the best interests of corporations over the best interests of the American people.
Thanks for watching the Young Turks. We really appreciate it. Another way to show support is through YouTube memberships. You'll get to interact with us more. There's live chat emojis, badges. You've got emojis of me, Anna, John, JR. So those are super fun. But you also get playback of our exclusive member-only shows and specials right after they air. So all of that, all you gotta do is click that join button right underneath the video. Thank you.